Today's webinar brought to you by OraSure Technologies. Technologies is a global leader in oral fluid substance abuse testing products. Their unique assays provide accurate and easy-to-administer testing methods to help determine the presence or absence of drugs or alcohol in a person's system. Oral fluid testing products provide a simplified collection process, faster results, cost savings with minimal risk of tampering, and dramatically reduced risk of adulteration. The Internet Oral Fluid Drug Test is an FDA-cleared laboratory-based oral fluid drug testing system that enables accurate testing for drugs of abuse, including marijuana, cocaine, PCP, amphetamines, and opiates. With a fast and easy-to-administer collection process, Intercept is ideal for workplace, criminal justice, drug treatment centers, and clinical setting screening programs, among others. Today's presentation is approved for 1 credit hour of continuing education from HR Certification Institute and SafePack. Further information will be provided at the end of our presentation. Today's presentation is entitled, Many Workers Misuse Alcohol and Drugs. Oral testing can effectively and efficiently find both substances, and will be presented by Bill Current and James Randisi. Bill Current is the president of WFC & Associates, a national consulting firm that specializes in drug testing policy development and providing accurate and up-to-date drug state testing law information. He is the editor of the online Ultimate Guide to State Drug Testing Laws at statedrugtestinglaws.com. He also publishes the e-newsletter State Drug Testing Laws Monthly. Mr. is a former executive director of the American Council for Drug Education and served as vice president of consulting for a national third-party administrator of drug testing and background screening services. The author or co-author of 10 books on substance abuse issues, including Why Drug Testing. He also administers the annual drug testing industry survey, now in its 15th year. JEV is president of Randisi and Associates and has been helping employers protect their reputation, their clients, and their workforce through employment screening and drug testing since 1995. He and his firm are passionate about helping employers avoid individuals who have exhibited dangerous behavior in the past, are falsifying the employment application, and are using illegal drugs. Working with a third-party administrator of general liability and worker compensation claims, them realize that if an employer spent time investigating an applicant before being brought to the workforce, significant savings could be realized and exposure to litigation reduced. His firm has an active clientele list of more than 200 large and small companies and manages multiple requests for reports on more than 1,200 individuals per month. State-of-the-art software allows the firm to reduce turnaround time in employment screening and drug testing reports to half the industry average. Randisi Associates is a member of the National Association of Professional Background Screeners and the Concerned CRAs Association. It will now be our pleasure to hear from Bill Current.
Well, thank you, Jessica, and it's a pleasure to be doing another OraSure hosted and sponsored webinar, and especially to be co-presenting with Jim Randisi. He and I have been consulting with one another on this presentation now for several weeks, and I think you're going to really enjoy his portion of the presentation. I'll go first, and then Jim will come in, and then we'll entertain your questions at the end of today's webinar. I've got the slides with some statistics just to make sure that we all understand just how serious the problem of drug abuse is in our country, and especially as it affects the workplace. There are nearly 24 million Americans, according to the latest report from the federal government, that admit to being past month users of illicit drugs. The government calls those people current drug users. That means they admit to using an illicit drug at least once in the last month prior to the survey. That's 9.2% of the American population aged 12 and older. Now, the rates are very similar to the 2002 to 2000, or excuse me, the last couple of years, but it's higher than the rates were between 2002 and 2008. Just prior to 2002 and leading into the early 2000s, we saw a dip in the rate of substance abuse, and then it started going up. And at the core of that increase is a resurgent interest in, if you will, marijuana. most commonly used illicit drug, always has been, but we're seeing a significant increase in the number of illicit drug users who prefer marijuana. Some only use marijuana, 2/3. Now, those who use other drugs, this is very interesting. Look at the second bullet there. The majority were non-medical users of psychotherapeutic drugs. That is pain relievers, tranquilizers, stimulants, and sedatives. So that's a very significant development. For many, many years, as you would observe from year to year, these federal studies, reports that would come out, you always saw cocaine as the number 2 drug right after marijuana. And there'd be a big gap between marijuana and cocaine. But cocaine reigned number 2 for a long, long time. Now when you add up all the different categories of psychotherapeutic drugs, prescription medications, all of them combined now rank number 2 to marijuana. That's a significant development, especially as we talk about drug testing. Are we testing for the drugs that people are abusing? Now, one of the misconceptions about drug abuse and drug abusers is that they're vagabonds, they're hobos, they're people who can't get jobs, they're sleeping under bridges. And the fact of the matter is nearly 68% of the individuals who admit to being current illicit drug users over the age of 18 are employed, either full or part-time. So this idea that you can't have a job or you can't get a job or you can't hold down a job is false. And those drug abusers bring their drug abuse habits into the workplace. And you're going to get these slides. You're going to have access to these slides. You'll be able to look at the comparison of the statistics and actually go to the website on the federal government website, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration website, and look at these numbers, really delve into the charts. But the vast majority of drug users, adult drug users that is, are actually employed. And they have proven over the years to be less effective employees than those workers who are not using drugs. They're less productive than their non-using coworkers. 3.6 times more likely to be involved in a workplace accident, 5 times more likely to file a workers' compensation claim. And depending on what industry you're in, like construction, for example, the average cost of a workers' compensation claim is really, really expensive. And, of course, you don't want that to happen anyway. If you have a drug user in your workforce, they're 5 times more likely to file a workers' compensation claim. And in fact, there was a study done some time ago that found that 80% of substance abuse-related accidents in the workplace are related to, are the non-substance abusing coworker that actually gets injured. And so it's a liability to the company, and it's a safety risk for the individuals who aren't even using drugs. Slightly more than half of Americans aged 12 and older reported being current drinkers of alcohol. Okay, I get it. Alcohol is legal. I don't happen to be a drinker myself, but I understand that there are a lot of people who like to drink alcohol. But if you look at that second and third bullet, you see the magnitude of the problem. Nearly one quarter, 23% of those 12 and older who admitted to being alcohol users actually admitted to binge drinking in 30 days prior to being surveyed. That's 59.7 million people. Very similar to the rate from the year before. In other words, no real change. Now, a binge drinker, according to the government, is somebody who admits to having at least 5 drinks on at least one occasion in the last 30 days. A heavy drinker, you can see the statistics there, 17 million. Those are individuals who admit to having at least 5 drinks on at least 5 occasions in the last 30 days. These are people who drink a lot. And sometimes their alcohol use and sometimes alcohol misuse can be a factor when it comes to the workplace. Workers with alcohol problems are nearly 3 times more likely than their non-drinking, than workers without drinking problems, I should say, to have an injury-related absence from work. Hospital emergency department studies showed that 35% of patients with occupational injuries were at-risk drinkers. And this is the kicker. Breathalyzer tests detected alcohol in 16% of emergency room patients injured at work. And the numbers keep going there. The point is that an individual who uses drugs, illicit drugs, and an individual who abuses alcohol, they don't necessarily keep that out of the workplace. Sometimes that comes into the workplace and can have a devastating impact on the safety of your workforce and of your workplace. And so every employer has a responsibility to be concerned about this. And the fact that such a large percentage of drug users are actually employed, I think really brings that issue home. If you're an employer or if you're in the business of providing drug testing services, that's something that every one of your clients needs to understand. And alcohol is still by far the number one drug of abuse. We talk about illicit drugs, and of course the number one drug is marijuana. But when we count in alcohol, it's much bigger. It's a much bigger problem comparison. And so alcohol testing can be an effective way to address the issue of substance use overall in the workforce. In fact, there was a paper not too long ago that if you're not doing alcohol testing, do you really have a drug-free workplace? And I think that's a very legitimate question to ask. There are a number of different technologies available for alcohol testing. Let me run through them real quickly so that we can talk about how they affect the workplace. Blood, of course, any scientist in the business will tell you blood is the gold standard of detection, whether it's for alcohol or for drugs. But we have to admit it's very invasive and it can be very expensive. So for workplace testing situations, it's not very practical. Here in Florida, where I live, if you're in the voluntary workers' comp discount program, then blood alcohol testing at a laboratory is the required method of testing. But that's very rare to find that. And even outside of the voluntary program here in Florida, you're free to test with another testing method. Blood is just not very practical. Breath is a very popular alcohol testing method. It's available both as a screen or as a confirmation. If that breath alcohol screen is non-negative, if it registers positive, then you have to get an evidentiary breath test done so that you have like a confirmation test as you would with drug testing. The cost is fairly reasonable, but it is challenging to find testing locations that have the evidentiary breath testing devices on hand in those locations. So sometimes that can be quite a challenge. Urine, you think, well, why don't we just test for alcohol with urine? Because urine is the most popular drug testing method. Why don't I tack on an alcohol screen along with that? The problem is urine as a specimen for alcohol testing is really not very reliable for detecting alcohol. And that's due to the fermentation process that takes place in the urine sample, which is caused by glucose in the urine. So convenient, but very uncommon that you find a workforce that's a company that's doing urine testing for alcohol. It's out there. It is an option that's available. Saliva/oral fluid testing, less expensive than most of the other testing methods. Very convenient for obvious reasons, but we're going to go through some of those here in a minute. Probably for doing tests on site in the workplace, it's probably the easiest to administer. So it's very cost effective in that regard. If you're thinking about doing saliva alcohol testing, there are a few things that you really need to insist on when choosing a testing device. I would look for an FDA-cleared device, a waived clear device, and you can cut to the chase by looking for a product that's on what's called the Conforming Products List, which is by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, because those products are accepted by DOT for DOT alcohol testing purposes. Look for something on the Conforming Products List, but use the product. Give it a test. Make sure that it's easy to use and that the results are easy to read. There's a lot of difference between the very best products that are on the market and all the rest. And so you make sure you're using a product that for ease of use purposes fits your needs, and you're not trying to somehow decipher the result with a very difficult to read device. And very important, you want to look for a device that is capable of rendering quantitative results. So in other words, it's not going to simply say positive or negative, but it's going to give you a blood alcohol content level reading, somewhere between 0.0, of course, and I would suggest something up to 0.15%. So those are some of the key things to look for in an alcohol testing device. go to that CPL, the conforming products list, start there, because you're going to know that these are products that have been cleared for DOT alcohol testing purposes, and then put them to the test. Make sure it's a product that will work for you. But drug testing seems to get all the attention, right? So while I recommend that every company have some alcohol testing methods in policy, like post-accident and reasonable suspicion, drug testing is the issue that gets a lot of the attention. Why? Well, it's everywhere. It's proven to be a powerful weapon in the war on drugs. It is something that companies can do to really target some of the key indicators of substance abuse in the workplace: accidents, workers' comp claims, overusage of health care benefits, productivity issues due to absenteeism or tardiness, things of that nature, and workplace violence and theft. There are numerous studies out there that show the before-after results of companies that started doing drug testing because of problems with these various areas that I just mentioned, and showing a significant improvement in any one of those key indicator categories after implementing drug testing. It is proven to be a deterrent, but it also is an effective way to help identify people who need assistance dealing with their drug abuse problem. Now, that said, there are different drug testing methods, just like there are different alcohol testing methods, and they're all good, okay? Depending on the circumstances, you're going to find what you need out there, okay? But it's a matter of picking the one that's best for you. Of all the different alternatives to the standard testing method, which one meets your needs? I did a survey about 15 years ago, the drug testing industry, as we were heading into the new millennium. And one of the things that came out of the survey was that in the future, we're not going to be doing drug testing the way we were doing it back then. And we were doing it back then that the vast majority of companies were doing was collecting a urine specimen, we were sending it to a laboratory overnight. We were at the lab, they were conducting a preliminary screen of that sample, and if the result was a non-negative, in other words, a positive at the screening phase, then the lab was conducting a confirmation test. It was confirmed positive with that confirmation test, then a medical review officer would attempt to verify it by finding out if the donor had any kind of reasonable explanation for the test being positive, and it would get reported to the employer, and every state has a different kind of a variation on the law that applies to reporting results. Well, that's how we were doing it 15 years ago, and 15 years later, it's still the most popular testing method. But compared to where we were 15 years ago, alternative testing methods have really taken a bite out of the market share of testing. There are a lot of pros to it, but some of the cons have prevented some employers from even getting into drug testing. The urine testing, which for all they knew, was the only testing method out there, just didn't meet their needs. It was too costly in terms of time and money. And, of course, they've heard the horror stories of people being able to cheat on urine drug tests. Lab-based oral fluid testing is a viable alternative because it, too, is accurate. It's legal in virtually every state, and it works in terms of addressing specific objectives with the drug testing program. You might note that at the head of this slide, I've said lab-based oral fluid testing because there is a significant difference in the technology and the science behind lab-based oral fluid testing and point of collection or on-site rapid result oral fluid testing. And so mostly we're going to talk about lab-based testing. The reasons for that is as the federal government progresses toward the adoption at some point in the near future of regulations for oral fluid testing, which the Department of Transportation has indicated they will adopt at some point after that, they're just talking about lab-based oral fluid testing. They're not in the process of developing regulations for point of collection or rapid result oral fluid testing. Just looking at lab-based oral fluid testing. And one of the things that I've noted over the last 15 years of doing the industry survey that I referred to is that that's where the interest level in the drug testing industry is. It's with oral fluid testing. Now, generally speaking, oral fluid testing, whether it's POCT or lab-based, is because a lot of issues that are inherent with urine drug testing go away. Gender collection issues are eliminated. You can do an observed collection from start to finish on every test. The collection process, really not embarrassing or invasive for the donor. eliminates all of the precautions that you have to go through with a urine testing program, like putting blue dye in the toilet water, turning off the hot water thing. All of those types of issues really go away with oral fluid testing. Shider issues go away. The time that it takes to do a test compared to urine testing is really just a fraction of the time. From an average of 60 to 90 minutes for a typical urine collection to somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 minutes to collect an oral fluid sample. It's flexible. You can virtually do it anywhere, anytime. And the thing is, as I mentioned, it's legal in virtually every state. There are only 3 states that don't allow oral fluid testing. It's legally defensible because the technology is sound. That's one of the great areas of progress over the last 15 years is the technology of lab-based oral fluid testing has really caught up with lab-based urine testing. So it's scientifically accurate. And one of the things that's unique about oral fluid testing that a lot of companies like is that it's a great way to measure recent use. I'm going to explain a little bit about that in a second, but for cause or reasonable suspicion, or even in a post-accident testing scenario, oral fluid testing makes a lot of sense because it can detect usage almost immediately after the individual has used the drug. And best of all, it has proven to be virtually adulteration-proof. A lot of the cheating methods that are so common with urine testing simply do not work when it comes to oral fluid testing. And these are just a couple of the quotes that came from one of our recent annual surveys. If you're in the drug testing industry, you may be familiar with the fact that we do these surveys every year, and we report the results at the SAPA conference. These are just a few of the quotes relative to oral fluid testing that came out of a recent survey. What we found is that companies that are in a position where they have to justify the expense of their drug testing program, like lab-based oral fluid testing, they're a company that's more apt to adopt oral fluid testing, lab-based oral fluid testing, than another company, because you're able to streamline the drug testing process and cut costs out of the program. So if you have to justify the expense of your drug testing program today, oral testing makes a lot of sense. And if you're in a situation where your workplaces are just not conveniently located near off-site collection sites where typical urine collections will take place, you may want to consider lab-based oral fluid testing because you can do the collection on site. It's so easy to do. It just takes minutes to train employees in how to do those. And the manufacturers, in this case, OraSure, they'll provide that training for you so that your workers know how to do it. We've found that these are the industries that are most likely to look at lab-based oral fluid testing. These are some of them. But it's also been very popular in non-workplace markets as well. The criminal justice arena, for example, law enforcement, schools, drug treatment, etc. There has been a growing interest in lab-based oral fluid testing because you're getting the security of a lab-based result with all of the convenience of on-site testing. You're not getting an immediate result like you do with a point-of-collection test, but you get to collect on-site, saving the time and expense of dealing with off-site collection facilities, but at the same time, you're sending that sample off to a laboratory to be tested, and you're getting a lab result back. Now, I know that there are probably some people on today's webinar who are in the drug testing industry, and you're wondering, why do I want to cut out all of that, collection business that we're getting? The truth of the matter is, as this issue progresses and as lab-based oral fluid testing catches on, clients are going to be asking for it anyways, and probably in some cases that's already been happening. And so it's a trend that most people in the industry predict is just going to continue, and it's going to speed up. So it behooves even people in the industry to become much more knowledgeable about lab-based oral fluid testing. There are some myths about oral fluid testing that just seem to continue to linger. So I'll kind of rapidly go through a few of these. I'm going to pause on a couple to take you through an ROI example, for example, when we get down to the truth of the matter is, fluid testing is as accurate as lab urine testing. And in some cases, the accuracy is actually a little bit better. Because keep in mind, with an oral fluid sample, you can detect a drug in that sample almost immediately after the individual has used the drug. with urine testing, there's going to be a little bit of a gap between the moment when that person ingested the drug and when it's detectable in a urine sample of about an hour. So if someone's back from a lunch break, for example, and they smell like marijuana, the urine sample that you collect within a few minutes after they get there, probably, it's not going to reveal the presence of the marijuana in the system at that. The smartest scientists in the drug testing business will always tell you that blood is the gold standard of detection, but it's impractical. Oral fluid mimics blood from a scientific standpoint. Okay, and you're also able to detect the parent drug and not just the metabolite of the drug, and that becomes very important here in a minute as well. Now, just like we talked about, the things to look for in a alcohol test, or excuse me, and things to look for in an oral fluid device, a lab-based oral fluid collection and testing system. One, I would insist on independent empirical data that backs any kind of accuracy claims that the manufacturer makes. That's very important. If they're making the claims, there needs to be some kind of documentation to back it up. And also, you want to look for an FDA-cleared device. Now, by that I mean not just the device, but the testing system in the laboratories. Which assays, which drugs are FDA cleared for detection in the lab-based test? Is just the SAMHSA 5, marijuana, cocaine, opiates, amphetamines, and PCP, or is it more drugs than that? A lot of
We are experiencing a technical problem. Just give us 1 second. Get back on the line. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I apologize. I'm not sure exactly where I cut out, but let me just pick up where I left off, and that way the recording will be consistent from where we were. And you're going to get these slides. So if you do have any questions, though, about anything in the slides, and I wasn't on the line talking about it, I apologize, but just send me an email or give me a call, and I'll go through it with you. Talking about the things to look for in a lab-based oral fluid testing device. And so, empirical data, the independent research that's been done on the device that backs up any accuracy claims that have been made. Look for an FDA-cleared device, not only the device, the collection device, but also the lab testing system as well. Which drugs or assays are FDA-cleared for detection with that testing method? Look for satisfied customers, ask for referrals, do your own internal research, and put the package insert to the test. These products come with what's known as a package insert, and there'll be all kinds of information in that. It's usually on a piece of paper that's really folded up and wound real tight. You can unfold it, you can get a magnifying glass out, and you can look at it and read the fine print and put that information to the test with some sample products from the source of the device, and know who you're doing business with. That's very, very important when it comes to any testing method. Now, one of the things that's often said about oral fluid testing is that the window of detection is too short. And the reality is the window of detection with oral fluid testing is shorter than with urine testing, but it starts sooner or faster with oral fluid than it does with urine. So in essence, you're picking up some positives on the front end of the testing window of detection with oral fluid that urine would miss, but you're also perhaps missing a few on the back end of the window of detection. When you look at the chart that shows the window of detection, you can see that just like with blood, oral fluid starts almost immediately after the individual has used the drug, but it's going to go as far out to the right as you can see with the yellow line, which is urine, or with hair, which starts later, days later after usage, but then will go out up to about 90 days. But when you look at some of the really good data that's out there that compares the positivity rates of urine with lab-based oral fluid testing, in this case the Intercept device, you can see that the overall positivity rate is pretty close. And if you scan down to the THC line, that's marijuana, you see that with Intercept, with lab-based oral fluid testing, the positivity rate was actually a little bit higher, 0.5 compared to 2.3. So the biggest difference was with amphetamines, but with cocaine, THC, even with opiates, the positivity rate was higher with lab-based oral fluid testing. In terms of identifying the accuracy of the product and sort of dispelling this issue that the window of detection misses too many positives, not the case. You're going to get more positives with oral fluid for some drugs and under some circumstances. One of the things that you hear a lot about is that you can't detect marijuana with oral fluid testing, and the answer to that, the good news is you can, but there's more to it than simply that. You've got to know what product you're dealing with, okay? There's a big difference between lab-based oral fluid testing and POCT oral fluid testing when it comes to windows of detection and the accuracy rate of detecting marijuana in particular, because there are different cutoff levels that are used with the lab-based testing system versus an instant result testing device. And so you want to look very, very carefully at the positivity rates and the cutoff levels in particular for the device that you're using if you're comparing a POCT oral fluid device with a lab-based oral fluid device. I really like this chart because that red dotted line going vertically from top to bottom, that comes down at about the 50 nanogram per milliliter line. And you can see the blue bars, they represent the positives, okay? The vast majority of positives for marijuana in oral fluid testing are below the 50 nanogram level. And if I had the ability to move that red dotted line over, I'd move it all the way over to 20 nanograms, and that's where the vast majority of my positives are still going to be. If you're looking at using a POCT device versus a lab-based device, you need to be asking about the cutoff level, because everything to the right of that dotted red line is just not very much. 80% of it, or 80% of the positives, are detected below 50 nanograms, and the majority of those are below 20 or 25 nanograms. So the cutoff level is very important when it comes to detecting THC. Drug cheating, I'm not going to say that there's no way to cheat on an oral fluid test, but it's nearly impossible to do it. The typical testing methods to the adulteration methods just don't work with lab-based urine testing, lab-based oral fluid testing. You can't add something to the sample. The collection of the sample is observable from start to finish. Switching samples, virtually impossible to do. In fact, I did a little bit of research on this, and I tried to find a website, and there are thousands of websites, literally, that will offer advice on how to cheat, and even products that they'll sell you on how to cheat on a urine test. The best website I could find, the best advice I could find for cheating on an oral fluid test, try to avoid the test. Do not give them your saliva. And it says at the bottom, between these periods of time, you must avoid being screened or you will surely test positive. That's the best advice the best cheaters in the world can give to somebody who's about to be tested with oral fluids. Just don't give them your saliva or you're out of luck. Cheaters love urine testing. There's no way around that. It is a cottage industry within the drug abuse culture to cheat on a drug test, and it doesn't work with oral fluid testing. And oral fluid testing is a very cost-effective way to do drug testing. I've got a little bit of an ROI chart here. And I'm a little bit late because I don't want to cut into Jim's time, but I'll just show you that you've got to take into account more than just the cost of the test. That's the biggest mistake you can make when trying to estimate the cost of your drug testing program and drug abuse, is to not factor in the lost work time that's related with sending a worker and a supervisor in many cases to an off-site collection site to void a sample. The time away from the workplace is significant in terms of factoring the cost of drug testing. With oral testing, employees and your supervisors don't need to leave the workplace because the collection process is so simple. So the cost stays exactly at what it is, with about a little bit of time factored in for overseeing the test and being away from your job for a few minutes to provide the sample, versus 60 to 90 minutes to be away from the workplace to give a urine sample. And we talked about FDA clearance. I won't go into a lot of detail here, but it's just very, very important. The last bullet shows it's not just the collection device, but it's the drugs that you're testing for as well. You've got to know if the assays are FDA cleared for the testing system that's used in the laboratory. Now, I waited Jim Randisi. Jim and I have been talking a lot over the last few weeks getting ready for today's webinar, and I'm looking forward to his part of it. He's got some real life examples of dealing with employers that have actually switched to oral fluid testing, and so I'm going to leave it to him to explain some of the experiences that he's had. Jim, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks to OraSure. We're enthused about this opportunity to partner with OraSure for this webinar. We have been a proud representative of Intercept products for more than 6 years and have found all of their representatives from customer service to vice presidents very aiding and helping our clients achieve their drug and alcohol testing goals. And Bill, thank you for leading this webinar in particular, and in general, being such a professionally competent resource for companies when it comes to ever advising on drug testing programs and policies. Clients that have made the switch, we have a large defense contractor headquartered here in Baltimore, Maryland. They have a random drug testing program in place and use Intercept literally around the country. We do the random selections for them at no charge. They were using a urine specimen program for their random drug testing, and it gets to your point on that earlier slide, Bill, about the indirect costs. They do about 200 random selections across various divisions each year, and it was taking an average of 1.5 hours to have an employee complete the urine specimen drug test collection process. Now, it included drive time to there, time there, and then drive time back. So we figured that using Intercept would save them about 300 employee hours per year at an average cost of, they had an internal cost of $55 per hour, or $16,500 a year. And so the cost of the urine and the Intercept tests were approximately equal. Neat story in the building trade. We work closely with property and casualty brokers here in the Mid-Atlantic region. Whenever a company considers an employment screening program with background investigations and or drug testing, typically they do turn to their property and casualty broker, as of these activities are an integral part of a good risk management program. So one property and casualty broker had a client with high workers' comp premiums. The broker called us up to present and discuss how screening, like background investigations and drug testing, might help increase workforce quality and also reduce their workers' compensation premiums. So the first time we heard a typical response from the company, they said, well, look, if we start drug testing, we're going to lose half our workforce. Why should we want to do that? And so 2 more years went by, and their worker compensation premiums continued to get more expensive. We did implement a basic background investigation process and drug testing using Intercept. And guess what happened? He, in fact, did lose a couple of employees in the random program and avoided some people on the pre-employment side who tested positive for illegal drugs. But the really neat part of the story is this. When he advertised, when he was losing his current workers and was advertising for workers, all of a sudden he was getting applications from individuals who worked for his competitors. And he inquired why they were applying with his company. They told him, look, the former employer doesn't have a drug-free workplace program in place, and we're tired of working with people who are half high on the job. And so that's why they were applying for a job with the company. And last of real-life examples, we have a retail grocer as a client. They have a relatively high turnover. They assemble a group of applicants periodically whom they want to take to the next step in the hiring process. And at the same time in the meeting, the first thing they do is they tell the new group of applicants that they do drug testing, but they use oral fluid, and here's the intercept test. And guess what happens? Routinely they will have an applicant or two just get up and leave, knowing that they will not pass the test. So in a particular case, the clients avoided the administrative time to set up a urine drug test at a collection center, avoided time devoted to monitoring whether or not they get there, and so it's been a good situation all around. So this bullet there, what kind of results can you expect to see after the switch? Well, you're going to increase workforce competency and productivity, and that's crucial in successfully competing in today's economic environment. You're going to lower work compensation costs and accident costs and health insurance costs and on and on. Bill, you and I talked earlier about the worker compensation premium discounts that many insurance carriers provide if companies implemented a drug testing program. And you're going to avoid people who are going to hurt your firm, potentially hurt your firm's clients, your workforce associates, and your firm's reputation in the community if they're involved in an accident and they're found to be high on something and you're in front of a judge and the judge is going to ask you why you don't randomly test folks that could pose a threat to the people in the community. That's it.
Well, perfect. Well, let me ask you a couple of questions. And know if one of the examples that you used up in the first bullet would apply or not, but what are a couple of the major issues that employers have to deal with when switching from a traditional urine testing program to oral fluid? I mean, do they need to revise their policy? Do they run into having to retrain their supervisors, managers? I mean, what kind of things can an employer expect to have to do to make that switch?
Yeah, that comes up when someone is taking a look at Intercept, and the first question is, well, how we do it? How are we going to? They have a concept of the urine test involved, and they don't understand that this is totally different. The oral fluid Intercept test is really very neat to do. Your company representative just observes the donor put the pad in their mouth. They take the pad out, put the pad in a tube, cap the tube, sign and seal the tube, and they give your company representative who has observed the test the signed, sealed tube back. And so it's really very clean. And OraSure rather has a very nice video of how to do the collection. It takes about 5 minutes to watch, and once an individual's gone through that, once we've walked through that with a new client who's using Intercept, it's really all concerns about what to do go away very quickly.
Okay. And let me take you back to the scene of our webinar presentation today on the QED. I understand in Maryland you can't actually do breath testing there. You can't use a breathalyzer.
Meth is not an acceptable specimen in Maryland for employment situations, right? A federal court just upheld that very recently. I have a blog entry on my blog at preemploymentscreen.com about that particular case. So, yes, you're right.
So one of our attendees today submitted the question, not to leading question, because I'd like to know what you think, but she asked if that's true that you can't use breathalyzers in Maryland, what would you recommend as an alternative?
Well, Sure makes the QED device you mentioned earlier about when you look at an oral fluid product, whether or not it's on the Department of Transportation approved list, and QED is an approved device that can be used in Department of Transportation situations, and DT is very strict when it comes to the percentage of drivers who need to be tested both for drug testing and for alcohol testing. So QED passes the test when it comes to acceptability and conformity standards.
Okay. And one of the slides that I put up earlier listed some of the industries that have a greater tendency toward lab-based oral fluid testing. I noticed in a couple of your examples, you had two of them listed here, a company from the construction industry and then the retail grocer. Are there other industries in particular that seem to be a good fit with lab-based oral fluid testing from your experience?
Yeah, I mean, we have them used in financial institutions, the defense contractors. We've got clients who periodically, a contractor's clients will require that the guys on the premises not be testing positive for illegal drugs. So the manager will go to the work site where all the workers are and just give the intercept test 8, 10 at a time at the same time and get that done. The manager comes back and submits the specimens to the laboratory for processing. So it's really very effective. Okay.
Now, one of the questions that has come in that I'll go ahead and take a stab at because apparently I left it out. But I mentioned that there are really only 3 states that prohibit oral fluid testing. I think I made the statement that virtually every state, but there are 3 states that don't: Maine, Vermont, and Hawaii. And I've had that question submitted by a number of people through the WEX page here. And let me just kind of clarify a couple of things. There are states with mandatory drug testing laws, like Connecticut, for example, Vermont being another one. And then there are states with voluntary drug testing laws, like here in Florida, or Georgia, or Ohio. And the difference being that in a state with a voluntary drug testing law, and I know that sounds like an oxymoron, a voluntary law, but it's voluntary to employers. If you wish to get into a program that, for example, in Florida offers a 5% workers' comp premium discount, you have to drug test according to regulations that are provided by the state, but it's purely voluntary. I don't have to participate in the program here in Florida. And those regulations that are part of that workers' comp discount program only apply to employers that are in the state program. Now, they also apply in the public sector to state government agencies, sort of a side issue. But in the private sector, they only apply to employers who are in that program. So as an employer here in Florida, if I choose not to be in the workers' comp premium discount program, then any restrictions here in Florida don't apply to me. So I can use, any testing specimen I want here in Florida if I'm not in that workers' comp program. There are some states, some voluntary state programs that do not allow point of collection, oral fluid testing. I'd have to go through and look at them. But there are a number of states, kind of related issue, that don't allow POCT testing, because one of the questions I always get when I do a webinar presentation on oral fluid is, you said there are 3 states, but what about going to do POCT oral fluid testing? Well, there are a whole lot more states that don't allow POCT oral fluid testing because they simply don't allow POCT. Minnesota is a good example of that. And I say that knowing that there may be people on the line, because this comes up all the time, who say, well, I know a company in Minnesota that's doing point of collection testing. And I'm sure that's true. But the statute says all tests have to be done in a laboratory. That's why in Minnesota, you would use a blood or urine alcohol testing system as part of that Minnesota law, whereas in Florida, under the Florida voluntary law, it requires blood alcohol testing, but outside of the voluntary law, I can use QED, for example, or a breathalyzer if I want to, because the law only applies to companies that voluntarily participate in the program, whereas in Minnesota, it's a mandatory law. And there are some states, Minnesota, Kansas, Vermont, as examples of states that don't allow POCT. But if we're just talking oral fluid, just fluid in general, then it's just Maine, Vermont, and Hawaii that do not allow oral fluid at all. And so that's the short list of companies or states that do not allow oral fluid testing. And again, I say that knowing that there are probably people on the line again who will say, well, I know a company in Vermont that does oral fluid testing. I don't doubt that. I can only tell you what the statutory law in the state of Vermont says, and that's what it says. Now, there's another question that came up, and I emailed my friends over at OraSure to get the answer. Somebody wanted to know what's the shelf life for the Intercept device, and Lori Jantz, one of their great representatives at OraSure, emailed me back and said it's 24 months. And so for the person who submitted that question, their answer has a shelf life of 24 months. Now, Jim, going back to your presentation, in that second bullet on the screen there, we're still on the Jim Randisi slide, lower cost and increased return on investment. Have you had companies come back and actually share that with you, that they feel like the cost effectiveness of oral fluid testing has really improved their return on investment with drug testing?
Well, example of the building contractor for sure was immensely, pleased with the fact that once the word got out that he was at a drug-free workplace, he was attracting a better quality of worker in his workforce. So that for sure. And the anecdotal stories that we get about avoiding people who are illegal drug users, it happens all the time. Even the Society for Human Resource Managers, they indicated that each illegal drug user will cost you probably $10,000 to $13,000, and that's not only due to increased accidents, but illegal drug users will use your health insurance program probably 2 to 3 times more than someone who's not using illegal drugs. So the effect they have on morale, and it can be detrimental. So we've had a number of comments from clients who have found people who were tested positive for illegal drugs and had remarked that the individual was just a downer, that people were upset with the individual, and so they failed to take the step after being enrolled in the employee assistance program. They were out of the workforce. So,
okay, perfect. We have some other questions that have been submitted from our audience, and I'll take this first one because evidently I may have said something that confused the audience. The question is, did you say or did you imply that you need to be 18 years of age or older to be drug tested? And I don't think I said that. If I somehow mangled my words and it came out that way, I apologize. But no, that's not the case. Sewer employees can sometimes be subject to drug testing as well. And in fact, every drug testing policy that we write at our company, we also include with it a consent form that a parent or a legal guardian can sign if their minor child is going to be subject to drug testing. Sometimes you'll go to a fast food restaurant, for example, and there'll be a sign on the door that we're a drug-free workplace or that we drug test. I'm not going to name the sandwich shop that I sometimes frequent, but they have a sign like that in their window. And so, yes, minors can be subject to drug testing as well. To that question, though, is always subject to any type of local laws that may apply. But I don't think I said that. But if I did, I didn't mean to say that. But I would deal with that on a case-by-case basis. Another thing I said earlier in the presentation that seems to have prompted some interest from a number of people on the call is the process that the federal government is going through right now to approve lab-based oral fluid drug testing. And a couple of people have written in asking what's the update on that, where are we at with that, and kind of interesting. I and some people more sure. In particular, we were at the annual meeting of the Substance Abuse Program Administrators Association, the annual SAPA conference, where I present the results of my annual drug testing industry survey. And Donna Smith was there. Now, Donna used to be in charge of drug testing in the Office of Drug Policy Enforcement at DOT many years ago, and she's a member of the Drug Testing Advisory Board, which is the group that recommended to SAPA or to SAMHSA that they look at lab-based oral fluid testing. And she gave a presentation at the conference in which she said that we're still probably about 2 years away from seeing, some type of finalization of those regulations. The next step would be going out for public comment. In other words, there would be some type of preliminary version of regulations that would go out for public comment, and then you and anybody who cares to comment can actually respond to what's in those preliminary regulations, and then SAMHSA will go through those comments, decide if there's any legitimacy to this one or that one. They may make changes, they may not, but before it becomes finalized somewhere down the road, it would go through, more of a vetting process. But they're making progress. It's coming along, but we're probably not going to see federal regulations on lab-based oral fluid testing probably until late 2015, early 2016. Now, I say that conservatively. It could be more than that, might be less than that. It's anybody's guess. I will say this, though, that since that process began, there has been a significant increase in the level of interest in lab-based oral fluid testing in the non-mandated drug testing arena. In other words, if you're mandated by DOT, you must do a lab-based urine test still. There is no lab-based oral fluid testing under the DOT regulations at this time. But because of this process of developing federal regulations, the train's left the station. This is going to happen. It's a matter of time now. That has spurred a lot of interest in lab-based oral fluid testing. And while I don't have any data to support this, I would say that, that there are scientific data to support it. There's a lot of anecdotal information that would suggest that there are more companies doing lab-based oral fluid testing now than ever before, simply because they see the writing on the wall. It kind of takes away some of the that they may have had with this newer technology, and now they're looking at doing it. And from Jim's report, that just sort of indicates and underscores the reality, which is a lot more companies are looking at it, and many companies are adopting it that in the past may not have done it because they felt like the federal government was never going to endorse it. They have, to a certain extent, now endorsed it. There are a ton of questions. This is probably the most questions we've ever had in a webinar, ORSHER webinar. Let's see. Marijuana positives at 25 nanograms in urine. Oh, I asked a question here. And Jim, I'll take a stab, but please jump in as you feel you'd like to. What's the equivalency of the cutoff levels for lab oral fluid versus lab-based urine? And sometimes it does appear like we're talking different languages at the same time, but the nanogram cutoff level, for example, for THC in a lab-based oral fluid test are 4 nanograms, would be the equivalent of what a lab-based urine test would be able to do. In other words, sometimes we may be talking about different numbers, but we try to present it in an equivalent manner so that you could have some assurance that the positivity rate is the same, is on the same type of cutoff levels, whether we're talking urine or oral fluid. I don't know, is that a question that ever gets asked of you, Jim?
Yes, it does. And because what you mentioned earlier, urine is testing metabolites. They're really not testing the parent drug itself, whereas oral fluid's testing the drug itself, the parent drug, so that over time the threshold levels have been developed so that the two tests result in similar positive findings. So you can really compare the two as one looking for both looking for different levels, but different of different substances. So
okay. We're we're about time, but Jim, let's take one more question. There are a lot here that we're not going to be able to get to. We will get to them post-webinar for you, though. But let's take one last one. Jim, is the person administering the oral fluid test required to be certified?
Great question. There's a fundamental difference between Intercept and QED. With QED, the collector is interpreting the results so that, and I can only speak for certainty in Maryland, if someone is using the QED device, you would need to be certified. OraSure makes that incredibly easy to do. They have a training course on the web that a person can take, and then a certificate can be printed once a couple questions are answered at the end. And the difference is that with Intercept oral fluid, they're not interpreting any results. They're just acting as an observer. And so typically the person administering the oral fluid Intercept test doesn't need to have any type of training. The donor signs a chain of custody form that says, this is my specimen, and I'm giving it to the observer, and it's signed and sealed, and then off it goes to the lab where the specimen's analyzed, the medical review officer gets involved, and that's a quick answer. I hope that helps.
Okay. I can't but just sharing one comment because it's nice to get some positive feedback. This was the best program that I participated in this topic for a long time. Thank you, one of our attendees wrote in. So, Jim, thank you very much. Great presentation. Good to present with you. And we're out of time, so let me turn it back over to Jessica so that our attendees can learn how they can access the recording of today's webinar.
Thank you, Bill. On behalf of OraSure Technologies, we hope that you found today's presentation informative and helpful. This presentation was recorded, and you will receive instructions informing you how to access the recording. Today's presentation is approved for 1 credit hour of continuing education from HR Certification Institute and SAPAC for CSAPAs. Please email me, Jessica Polk, at Jessica, Jessca, at billcurrent.com. And Bill Current is BILLCURRENT. If you're interested in receiving those credits. Thank you for your attendance today. Again, the email one more time is Jessica Polk, or Jessica at billcurrent.com. Thank you very much, and this concludes today's webinar.